My name is Haley White, and I'm the Small Farms Outreach Coordinator in Marion and Polk counties. And I'm collaborating with Melissa Ferry in the South Valley to bring you the livestock webinar series. And this evening, we have a very special guest, Gene Pirelli. Gene's a professor emeritus with OSU Extension. He was a livestock specialist in the Valley for a very long time and comes with a lot of expertise in the subject. And he'll be talking about raising healthy feeder pigs this evening. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Gene. And actually, one more thing that I forgot is we will try to save all questions to the end, and Gene will address those questions. If you want to put them in the chat, just in case you forget them, you want to write them down, we can answer the questions in the chat and any live questions at the end. So thank you very much, Gene.
Thank you, Haley and Melissa. Welcome this evening. We're going to spend about an hour talking about feeder pigs, and kind of titled this presentation, "So Now I Own Some Pigs. What next?" Some of you are experienced producers, most likely. Some maybe just purchased some for the first time this past year. Maybe some of you are looking at buying some pigs, and so we're going to try to address some of the things that are most bigger issues for feeder pigs. So the topics that I'm going to cover this evening: housing and health considerations for new pigs when they arrive and when they're on your place. We're going to talk a little bit about protein and energy needs for feeder and pigs and growers and finishers. Feeding suggestions, and I've kind of split that piece up into two sections. One is for those that are going to be or are purchasing a sack feed off the shelf, and also have a few comments to make about pasture-raised pigs and some of the things to consider. For those of you that are purchasing feed, want to spend a little time interpreting the feed tag information and how it relates to swine nutrition. There's some tricky things to look out for, and so hopefully we'll give you some ideas and some things maybe you haven't covered before. So let's start off at the end. I assume, Haley, that you've got the link. If not, we got a little time to do that. We have a publication, I guess OSU has a publication called Care and Management of New Feeder Pigs, and that was I believe the last revision was 2019. I retired in 2018, and I think we've finished that a year after I retired, but that basically has a lot of detail about the things we're going to cover this evening, and probably more detail than I have time for. So it's good reading. I'd suggest getting that, downloading it, and either printing it off or reading it online. So that link will be available to you either at the end here or in a separate outreach. So let's start with when pigs arrive on your place. And I think the most important comment I would make is, and we're going to talk a little more about this and why it's important, but my suggestion, and this is not just pigs, this is any class of livestock, if you're buying lambs, if you're buying any kind of livestock, don't commingle from different sources. I have recommended for a long time, as others, that we try to quarantine and keep them separate, and that prevents cross-contamination of diseases. Maybe some of the pigs from one farm have a high resistance, good immunity to specific diseases. Others may be carriers and not resistant and can get sick. So let's try to keep them separate. I know that it's not easy, especially when you have buying small batches of pigs. The other thing too is ask the seller if the pigs receive vaccinations and what kind. That's a pretty important point. So if you're buying animals each year, which you probably are if you're raising feeder pigs to finish, to buy your animals from a place that has a good health program. That's not always available to you, but if you find a place that has a good health program, has healthy pigs, that's a good place to start. Again, ask them what they vaccinated for. If you're not sure, say for example, you bought them at an auction, my suggestion is to vaccinate upon arrival to your place. If you're only even purchasing a couple of animals, the cost of a 50cc bottle of vaccine is a whole lot cheaper than a dead animal. Remember, though, that immunity is not immediate. Depending upon the disease that you're vaccinating for, it could take 14 days to have some level of immunity, usually 3 weeks, 21 days to have sufficient immunity. There are some diseases that require a booster. One would be, for example, a tinobacillus pneumonia. That does require a second vaccination to increase the immunity. And that's one that's pretty common in pigs. It's a respiratory disease, and they can come down with that pretty readily, especially if they're moved around. So the other thing to do is do a little bit of research before you buy your animals about vaccines. And the reason I say that is especially in Oregon, we're not a really big swine producing state. So a lot of times vaccines aren't really available at the farm store. You may have to order them. And so I would do a little research before you buy your pigs. If you need a vaccine, be sure to source that, have it available readily, at least know where you can get it before you buy the animals. So some of the challenges to successes with new feeder pigs. The first thing, and we've covered this a little bit, is I really encourage people to establish a vaccination program if you're buying pigs that you're not sure have been vaccinated, or if you're buying from somebody that doesn't vaccinate. As similar to humans, before I retired, I ran into a lot of folks who have a philosophy that vaccination is not natural and really they shouldn't be given. But as opposed to antibiotics, which a lot of the natural markets now frown on antibiotics. In fact, most of them will not accept animals that have antibiotics in them. Vaccines protect against diseases, and so this is something that will actually reduce your antibiotic use if you do vaccinate. And we do have I keep saying I've been separated from the university for a while, so OSU does have, and Haley hopefully will have that link as well, to a guide that was put together the last revision in 2016, but still valid. It's vaccination recommendations for Oregon pork producers, and that lists most of the vaccinations that we had recommended in Oregon. Dr. Chuck Estel, who's extension veterinarian still at OSU, and I put that together to guide people through a vaccination program. It does list vaccines for sows, gilts, and young pigs, but if you're just doing feeder pigs, you can pull out that section. New animals. I encourage people to quarantine. I call it the 3 Qs: quarantine, quarantine, and quarantine. For several reasons, which we talked about. One, if you're buying pigs from several sources, I encourage you not to commingle them because you have various levels of immunity. And a lot of times your pigs that have a low immunity to diseases might pick up something. And something that might be carried by a group of pigs that come from a farm that has some immunity but still a carrier. So quarantine the animals, especially if you have animals on your place. Let's say, for example, you've got 3 or 4 or 5, 10 sows, and you decide you want to buy some feeder pigs. I would strongly suggest that you quarantine those pigs away from your sow herd. In other words, don't put them in the same group, same building if possible, or at least try to separate them in some way. The other thing to think about is if you do have two groups, think about how you're doing your feeding. So you don't want to really, if you brought in a group of animals, you really don't want to feed them first and walk over and feed your existing herd, because you might be bringing something over that they have. So usually I suggest you do all your chores and then you take care of them last, and then you clean up, sanitize. So again, quarantine is quite important. So we talk a little bit about vaccines and commingling, and this is the reason why, is that when there's usually among different farms a pretty static level of disease. We call that a disease challenge level. So there's bugs out there. There are diseases that can infect your pigs, pretty consistent throughout various farms. When you haul animals, let's say you got you go pick them up, and like you pick them up and the weather's kind of cool and kind of nasty, and they get chilled, and you bring them into your building. They technically have a low resistance level to those diseases if they haven't been vaccinated. And so they end up going from being healthy on somebody's farm, they get to your place, and you notice within about 4 or 5 days, they start getting sick. And usually viral diseases will kick in about 14 days because their resistance is low. They don't have that immunity to those diseases that either they picked up, let's say, going through an auction yard. And there's nothing wrong with an auction yard. I'm not saying that's bad, but you got massive commingling there, and a lot of places for disease bugs to be picked up. And then you bring them home, and they got a low resistance, and so they end up getting sick, and then you've got to treat them. And if you're trying to sell natural pork, organic pork, that really puts a crimp in your sales. So we want to vaccinate because we want to increase that resistance level, so that if you look at the disease challenge in the middle, like on the other slide, your resistance is high. You got a lot of immunity, and so that's why we encourage vaccination. Additionally, you want to have good management to reduce the challenge level. So some good sanitation, not, if you go to another person's farm and they have pigs, wouldn't hurt to scrub up a little bit before you get home. Maybe change your clothes, scrub your boots, that kind of thing. A little bit of biosecurity. We're not going to talk a lot about that tonight, but that combination with good sanitation, good management, vaccination really increases the health of the feeder pigs that you bring home. Other challenges to success, and this is part of the management, is reduce the environmental stress, especially for young pigs in wintry weather. We're going to talk a little bit about temperature ranges that are ideal or suggested for pigs. Really want to make sure that you try to, keep pigs. And of course, we say, well, they like the mud, but that may be in July when it's hot. This time of the year, for example, outside, they get pretty chilled. So especially for those operations that don't vaccinate, we really want to have some good housing and good conditions for them to be in. Those of you that want to raise free range pigs, maybe that range into wooded areas, there are some geographic areas of the state that have higher numbers of feral pigs. I don't know, I've been out of the loop a little bit, but Jackson, Josephine County at one time, Grant County, some of those surrounding counties had quite a few feral pigs. Free range pigs are a greater risk for major diseases such as brucellosis, which the state is brucellosis free currently. And we don't have to vaccinate in swine. Or if we had a potential threat like African swine fever, that would be could be a reservoir in feral pigs, and they could be a source of infection for diseases in those areas. So just be aware that if you're going to free range pigs outside, that make sure there's no other contamination sources that can infect your herd of pigs. The other thing is, don't forget parasite control. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. This is the only slide, but you might need to treat for internal parasites. Be sure to follow the label directions. That vaccination guide I spoke of earlier, it has some pretty good suggestions for internal parasite strategies. Watch for lice and external parasites. If you're using an ivermectin product, typically those will take care of sucking lice. Sometimes you get resistance with some of the ivermectins these days, and so you may have to do some other treatments for external parasites. But parasites internally and externally do interfere with good growth and good health, and so we want to make sure that we take care of those as well. So let's talk a little bit about temperature ranges. And I used to get, when I throw this slide up, I used to get a lot of producers rolling their eyes. Oh my gosh, how can you have those kind of temperatures, but in some of your facilities? But these are suggested temperature ranges for pigs that are 1,500 and 215 plus pounds. The main point here is that we even though we say, like, for example, a 50 pound pig would like it around 70 degrees, for example, that doesn't mean that if you go below 70 you're going to have some issues. The main concern is that we don't drop our nights, for example. If pigs are outside even in the springtime, your temperatures can drop into the, depending on where you're at, to freezing or below, or into the 30s, and right now you go outside, it's 42 degrees, it's raining, and the chill factor is pretty great. So we want to make sure, especially when you buy your younger pigs, that they have protection against cold temperatures as well as heat. In the summertime, we get above 80 degrees, and so that's another consideration. Make sure they're not overly overheated in the summertime. 100 pounds, we can drop them down to 60 or a little below, and like a 215-pound pig, 15 to 50 degrees works fine. When you get into bigger hogs that are 250, 260, they can withstand a lot lower temperatures, even though we'd like to see them protect against the wind, that chill factor. So those are just some things to think about. But if you're buying some, let's say weaner pigs that are 20, 25 pounds, they really need to have protection against really cool, cold temperatures or very hot temperatures. So how do you provide heat for pigs? Well, there's a couple of different scenarios. One is heat lamps, and I'm going to talk about some of the other strategies, but a big caution on heat lamps is fire danger. And I'm going to show a slide that illustrates that, especially when you mix heat lamps and straw. Floor pads, straw is good for bedding, and then hovers, and I'll kind of cover what that is here in a minute or two. But I've used this slide a lot over the years. I use it now. I still do a couple of lectures for the swine production class at OSU. And I like to show this one because it's kind of a makeshift, even though I know that most of you are interested in feeder pigs. I like to call your attention to two things in the slide. One is that the heat lamp on the far left is pretty low, and uh, the sow, if she kind of rubs on that pallet, it doesn't look very sturdy. Um, Sows are pretty strong, and they can go right through that pallet and get into that heat lamp and knock it down. The heat lamp on the far right is sitting there right within reach, and all she'd have to do is yank on that thing and knock it down, and you'd have a fire because there's a lot of straw. So I just show this slide to kind of think about, if you're going to use a heat lamp and you're going to have straw, um, it's really one that you want to protect the heat lamp and have it high enough to where they can't get at it, because pigs climb anything that has bars across it or slats like those pallets you see. They can climb up there and knock that down. When we had a commercial swine industry in Oregon, it was about the late 1980s. One of our major hog producers had a fire and lost a building full of pigs. I can't remember the number, but there were literally hundreds of pigs that perished in the fire, and it was traced back to a heat lamp that got knocked into some straw. So just be real careful when you and remember that pigs can climb up and knock those down. Uh, Okay, next thing, sorry, is floor pads. I don't have any visuals to show, but basically, it's just like, can be like a piece of plywood on the floor or hard plastic. Pigs like to chew, and so they will tend to chew it up over time. But if you have a concrete floor, that can be cold. And I worked a lot with a ag engineer on campus, Jim Moore, for years. We did a lot of swine programs, and uh, Jim always used this example that he says, if you think concrete is warm, he says, pull your shorts down and sit with your bare cheeks on a concrete floor in the summertime, and you can tell how cold it is. And so what you're trying to do, if you've got a concrete floor that the pigs are in, just, if you don't use any bedding, put a piece of plywood down like 1/2 inch, and that'll insulate them from that concrete and keep them a little warmer. Straw, again, straw bedding insulates against cold concrete or soil. Also gives the impression of happy pigs, and I still keep in contact with a couple of producers that produce natural pork for some of the natural food store chains, and they like to have pictures of pigs on straw because it keeps them clean looking and also provides pretty good bedding, and they insulates them from soil, so, or concrete especially. So that works pretty well. The other thing that I'm going to finish up with on methods is something called a hover, and that publication that you have in that hopefully there'll be a link to at the end, does have a little section on hovers. But basically, a hover is a small enclosure that conserves body heat. So it's kind of a small room within a room. And Jim Moore and I did a lot of work with hovers when we worked with some of the commercial producers in Oregon in the 1980s and late 70s and 1980s. And basically, it's just a little building just made out of plywood, a little box that pigs can go in. Sometimes people will have a hole cut in the top and they can put a heat lamp, or just of course, incandescent light bulbs are being phased out, but we'd also use incandescent light bulbs to provide heat, but this is just an example, and this photo is actually in the publication. These were pigs on slatted floors, and they just this producer built boxes so the pigs can go in and they could use body heat to keep warm. So it's just a way to, if you've got a big room, let's say you're putting them in a big old barn, instead of trying to heat the whole barn, just confine the pigs to a smaller area and build a little shelter for them like that. It's called a hover, and surprisingly, they will use it and they will get inside and keep themselves warm. So how can we tell our pigs are cold? Well, there's one way to do it. If they are warm, they lay in a pattern. If they're cold, they pile up. So this is an example, and this is out of a commercial producer years ago that had farrowing crates, and those are what we call tenderfoot plastic coated flooring. They had some lamps, but they didn't turn them on all the time. And when the lamps were turned off, the pigs would huddle up and pile up to conserve body heat. A little hard to do in an open space. That's why a kind of a hover works pretty well, because they can all pile up inside that little room and then conserve their body heat. But if they have adequate room temperature, then they lay in a pattern, or just they lay out. So that's one way to tell. If you've got pigs that are all huddled up in a corner, then that tells you that they're probably cold. Or there's a draft, that could be as well. So, okay, well, we're going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to take a little sip of water, and we're going to talk about some nutrient needs and feeding suggestions. So the first thing that I'd like to remind you of is the swine digestive system. Pigs have a simple stomach. We call them monogastrics. They're just like us, simple stomach, monogastric, and that's different from cattle and sheep that are ruminants. Although in my experience, a lot of people try to feed pigs like sheep and cattle, and that doesn't always work quite as well. And that's why some of the feeds aren't that are available for cattle and sheep don't work well with pigs. So this is a little complicated slide, but all I want to do with this would be a ruminant animal. Basically the protein goes in, it's degraded into amino acids, it's incorporated into microbial protein, and then that goes into the small intestine, and then it's broken back down into amino acids. And some of the protein is bypassed, like 35% goes directly through, but most of it is rearranged. And although we say, well, it's not very efficient, but that's how come a ruminant animal can take some pretty rough feed and convert it to some pretty digestible food in the small intestine after it goes through the rumen. But in swine, basically, it's just like us. We have to take in dietary protein, and then it's broken down into amino acids directly, and that is used for growth, mostly in the small intestine, a little bit of absorption in the large intestine. So when we talk about protein for like what you see on a feed tag, it's usually listed as total protein or crude protein, and that's really the total amount of protein that's in that feed listed as a percent. Crude protein, and I guess it's appropriately named because it's a crude measure. Basically, the laboratory will take a sample of the feed, measure the amount of nitrogen in it, multiply it by 6.25, and that's where you come up with percent crude protein. It's just all based on nitrogen, because protein is 16.5% nitrogen, and so that's why that 6.25 figure works. Problem is, that's great for ruminants, but it's not a measure of quality or digestibility, and that's an issue with pigs, because when I was doing quite a few swine rations for producers, I guess to qualify my background, I was the extension swine specialist for about 30 years at OSU. So I did a lot of work with swine producers and developed a lot of rations. And really, when we look at percent protein, that's a minor consideration in a swine feed. Really, we want to look at the amino acid content. That's more important than just the amount of crude protein. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. Don't expect you to become nutritious after this, but I want to give you just some take-home examples. So again, amino acids are the building blocks of protein. We have all the amino acids that go into making protein. There are quite a few amino acids, but there's really 10 that are known as dietary essential amino acids for pigs. And here's the list. No, there won't be a test after this. You won't have to memorize them, but I have two that are starred. The first one is lysine, and the second one is methionine. And the reason those have little stars by them, because those are the two most important amino acids in a pig feed. And so without those, especially with lysine, that is the most important one. If there's short supply in your feed, then really the growth rate slows down considerably. So if we look at this hypothetical muscle, which is protein in the pig, you can see that the chains of amino acids go together: lysine, methionine, tryptophan, leucine, isoleucine, valine, so forth. I mean, there can be all sorts of different configurations. The important point here is that if one or more amino acids are deficient, especially when we talk about lysine and to a lesser extent methionine, protein synthesis in the animal, or in other words, muscle growth, either stops or proceeds at a slower rate. And so when we have diets that are low in amino acids, available amino acids, then they're going to grow slower. I'm not saying that slow growth is detrimental, but if you're wanting to get these pigs ready for market by a certain day, especially when you talk about show pigs, people that are raising show animals are really under the gun to get them market weight by a certain date. Then this is quite important. So amino acid and some of the protein sources that you can use for pigs. Soybean meal is used a lot. It is very high in the level of amino acids. It provides a lot of amino acids for swine. Canola meal, which is a byproduct of rapeseed production, is high. A lot of people like to use peas as a protein source. It's low to moderate. Still provides amino acids, not as high as soybean meal. Fish meal is high. Alfalfa meal is low to moderate, and dried milk products, for example, like dried whey, it has a moderate source of amino acids. When we look at energy, carbohydrates, that provides what's necessary for growth, reproduction, lactation, especially growth in your feeder pigs when you're trying to get them to market weight. The important point here, and when we look at feed tags, we'll kind of bring that point out. Energy is estimated, not tested. So when you look at a feed tag for any livestock feed, it'll talk about protein and the minerals and the fat maybe and the fiber, but it'll never have an energy content listed. And I've always said that in a lot of cases for livestock feeds, protein can be adequate. Energy is always usually deficient because we really don't have a good handle on what the energy level our feed is. But there are some ways to determine that. So I'll give you some ideas here in a few slides. So the energy content is often listed as TDN, total digestible nutrients, and that's an old system that I learned in the 1960s when I was in high school, balancing rations with the Pearson square on total digestible nutrients. And some people still use that, but a more precise way is to look at the calorie level of grains, for example, or fats. So we want to, look at the digestible energy as either a kilocalorie or a megacalorie. And you don't have to worry about knowing those particular terms, but I want to show you some of the relative calories in some of the grains. The last thing to mention is that grains and fats provide the bulk of energy needed for growth and lactation, especially in your market hogs that you're trying to get to market weight. If they're deficient energy, their need for protein and amino acids goes way down. I'll show you some nutrient charts, but the amount of energy needed rapidly is a lot higher, and so grains and fats provide the bulk of that energy. If we look at the relative energy of different grains, corn is the highest, wheat and barley in the middle, and then oats is the lowest in terms of energy source out of the starch of those grains. However, if you are interested in the protein content, then oats has the highest protein and corn has the lowest protein. So depending upon what your goal is in a ration, and sometimes you don't have that choice if you're buying the feed, and it could be pelleted and you don't know what's in there. But if your younger pigs would do better with a little more oats in the ration with a higher protein, and then switching to more energy dense feed like corn, for example, later on. So I talked a little bit about the calorie content. If we look at TDN, you can see the relative differences. And then again, as we talked about the kilocalories per pound, corn being the highest, wheat a little higher again than barley. Although if you look at TDN, they're relatively close, but the actual calorie content is higher for wheat, and then oats being lower at 1260. A lot of times you'll see fats and oils put into a feed, and those contain about 2.25 times the energy of corn, and they're usually put in feeds in small amounts to raise the calorie density of content. Soybean meal, for example, is pretty common. Another thing is white grease, kind of like Crisco shortening, that kind of thing. Those are often put in small amounts, usually 7% maximum, maybe around, more commonly around 3 or 4% to raise that calorie content, or to adjust. For example, a feed company might have corn, and then they get a really good value buy on wheat, for example, or barley, and they'll switch in some barley or wheat into the mix, but they still want to keep their energy content the same. So they'll add a little bit of fat or oil in there to keep the energy content consistent. So let's look at some nutrient requirements for these pigs. Weaner pigs, usually around 20-30 pounds, they're going to require a pretty high calorie, but not as high as your finisher pig, but they're going to need about 1,600 calories per day. But I think the most important thing to look at in this slide, the kind of take-home message, is the percent lysine. That's pretty high for weaner pigs because they are putting on muscle and growth. And even though it says 22% crude protein, again, remember we said crude protein really doesn't indicate the quality of that and the amino acid content. So that's just there for kind of a reference, but it's a pretty high lysine content as well as other amino acids. Feeder pigs, 50 pounds plus, 3,400 calories per day, kilocalories, I should say, but still a pretty high lysine content. Growers drops like 100-pound to 125-pound grower, about 1% lysine. And then when you get to your finisher pig, as I commented before, it's really put on most of its muscle, and frame, and it's just needing more energy to finish out. And so the need for lysine is quite a bit lower. The need for protein in general is lower. So from what we talked about right now, we know what the pig needs. The break in what I call the nutrition link is that, even though we know if we got the charts, we look at the nutrient content, nutrient needs. Most of the time, many times we lack feed nutrient content. So the only thing when you go to the feed store or wherever you buy your feed, unless you've got a knowledgeable person, which a lot of places do have a knowledgeable person, but a lot of times they're buying, they are distributing a commercial feed from a major company. There's not a lot of information available on that feed. So you kind of have to pick out some key things that tell you maybe what you need to know. So this is a sample feed tag. It's an actual feed tag. I just recopied it so there wouldn't be any feed name on there, company name. It's a pig grower designed for pigs between 30 and 75 pounds. Has a 50-pound bag. And so this is the ingredient of it, guaranteed analysis. 18% protein, minimum lysine of 1.1%. And then you can take a look at the rest of them there. I'm not going to go into a lot of minerals tonight. But again, if you go back to this slide here, if you're trying to feed like a weaner pig, it's pretty close, but your lysine content is a little below what that weaner pig needs. It's probably closer to a high weight feeder pig lysine requirement as opposed to a younger pig like a weaner pig. Even though it says minimum 1.1%, my guess is that it's not going to be too much higher than that as a guaranteed analysis. Again, the 1.1 is kind of closer to a grower, like a 125-pound pig in terms of lysine content. So here's the fun part. These are the ingredients. Grain products, plant protein products, processed grain byproducts, and fat. It does have lysine in it, and it does have methionine supplement. But I guess my challenge to you is how do you tell what the energy content is? Is it, when they say grain products, is it wheat? Is it barley? Is it oats? Is it corn? Is it a combination? What are they using for plant protein products? Okay, is it soybean meal or is it alfalfa meal, which is lower than the rest of the amino acids? They are adding lysine and methionine for amino acids to bring them up to that 1.1 level for lysine, but remember we said there's 10 amino acids that are dietary essentials for pigs. So what does the rest of it have? The reason I show this ingredient for that particular product and why I don't show the name of it is because this is gives you a pretty good indication of the, your protein percent and your lysine content. Virtually nothing about the energy content. So we have no clue. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many calories per kilocalories per pound this product has. The only way you can you have to ask, okay, do they have a nutrient breakdown sheet? What does it have in it? What's the energy content? More than likely, they will give you an energy content. Most of the large companies do not list their individual grain products in there because, as I talked about earlier, that allows them to, with a generic label like this, they can kind of switch between corn, wheat, and barley, and still come up with the same energy level. So you need to ask what's the energy content of that feed. That's not so important for the young pig, but as you get to feeding older pigs, if you're using bag feed, that becomes a little more critical. This is another feed. Again, I just copied it off without the name. It was Pig Grower 16 based on 16% protein. The main thing I wanted you to note is the lysine content. That is at 0.5%. That is far below even what a finisher pig would require. So this would probably be okay for finisher pigs. Again, we don't know the energy content, but I wouldn't suggest feeding this to a younger pig because I think the growth rate's going to be awfully slow. Again, showing that chart again, minimum lysine content for a finisher is about 0.75%. So that's probably going to be, that kind of feed would be okay as a finisher feed, provided it has a good energy content. But we don't know. We got to look at the label and try to determine what we have in there as far as feeds. Okay. So we talked a little bit about those people that might be buying their feed and feeding a concentrate feed. I thought I'd throw in a few slides for those interested in a pasture grazing system. And this can be the subject of great controversy. And I always had a common statement that if what you're doing is successful, we'll keep doing it, because there's no way I can contradict success, because I always say if you argue with success, you'll lose every time. So these are just some suggestions to think about if you're looking at like a pasture system or a free range system. And pigs prefer legumes like alfalfa, the brassicas like rape and kale, anything in the cabbage family. They really love tender cereals like oats, especially wheat, or they like squash. And so those folks that I worked with, and some of the ones that I had contact with in other states that are doing some pretty good grazing systems, they do a lot of farming along with it, and they raise the crops, and then they put their grower pigs and try to finish them up on some of these crops. And again, like rapeseed, annual ryegrass works. We have a lot of that in this area. We can grow alfalfa pretty well in most parts of Oregon where there's water, or even dry land on the west side. Corn stalks and corn ears that are dry or somewhat mature work pretty well. You grow them and turn the pigs in. And I have found personally that these kinds of crops, and there's others, for example, squash, you can grow squash and then turn the pigs out into them, but they work a lot better than just grass, straight grass. And so and they seem to forage better and do better. But again, you might have a different experience, but these are just some of the things that I had recommended. Kind of getting towards the end of the presentation, I wanted to bring up an actual example of a pasture system. After I retired, a couple of years after, I did a little bit of consulting with a group in Eastern Oregon, and most of their feed were they fed concentrate feeds, and they also had pasture, and they fed alfalfa hay because they raised quite a bit of alfalfa. And so they had some issues there. Their sows were not milking quite as well. They had a sow, and we call it a farrow to finish operation, where they had sows. And they also purchased some feeder pigs, and they were just felt like it was taking too long to get the pigs to market weight. So they sent me their ration they were feeding, and so basically they were feeding 4 pounds of a concentrate that was made at a mill in Idaho. The lysine content of that was about 0.3%. They were feeding some third cutting alfalfa hay, and I did an estimate book value from several sources and came up with about a 0.27% lysine content in their alfalfa hay. And then they had some grass legume pasture that we estimated they were eating about 1 pound of dry matter per day of that. That combination had about a 0.2% lysine content. So the total lysine in the diet was about just a little over a quarter of a percent. So really far below what those pigs were really needing. And of course, energy content was a little low too, but I'm not going to show all the energy side. I just want to concentrate on the lysine percent. So again, if we look at that chart for a finisher, which they were trying to get to about 260 pounds on these pigs as a market weight. They felt like they were just, well, they had, some pigs, they were going 8 to 9 months before they were ready for market, or even longer. And they wanted to accelerate that. So the only way to do it was to try to push a few more amino acids. A quarter percent when we really need about 0.75% lysine was far below. So we had the mill increase their lysine content of the concentrate, because you really can't increase the lysine content of your hay or your pasture. So increase the lysine content to 0.65. And that kicked up the lysine content in the diet to almost 0.5%. And last I heard, the pigs were doing a lot better. They weren't taking quite as long. I also encourage them maybe to kick that up a little more in the diet as far as the concentrate and the lysine percent. Lysine is not cheap if you're adding it to the diet. Synthetically, there are synthetic lysine additives. The best way the easiest way to do it is to boost the, let's say, the amount of supplement like soybean meal or canola or even fish meal in there to naturally increase the lysine. But this is an example of somebody that was wanting to pasture raise pigs, but we're disappointed and frustrated with the amount of time it took to get them to finish. I guess the other important take home message, though, is that we have to remember that they're not ruminants, and so they're not going to graze and gain like they would if they were on concentrate feed. But you can supplement them with a concentrate. Bob Dixon was the meat scientist at OSU. He and I did a small trial about 2012 or 2010 where we took about I think we had about, I have slides, I don't have them with me, about 10 feeder pigs, and we put them free range on a pasture, and we put it was actually an old sheep pasture. We were trying to document how much they would eat out of the pasture and how much they would eat out of the feeder. And it was a concentrate feed, good quality, had good lysine content. And they finished out pretty fast. About 6 months, they were ready for market. They weighed about 280 at market time, 280 pounds. And they got about 98% of their diet out of the self feeder with the feeds, and just a couple percent in the pasture. They go around and pick some of the clover, but they didn't eat very much of the tall fescue grass. And so you can do a combination, a various combination, but you want to remember what your goal is, and sometimes you kind of have to figure out, well, I'm feeding this low amino acid dense concentrate, or I'm just doing it on vegetables and grass. And that's fine. It'll take you longer, but if you're feeding a low quality feed, especially for those who are buying concentrate and feeding it, and you want the cheapest thing out there. If it takes you a lot longer, you got to pencil out what the cost per pound is, because sometimes buying the better quality feed and finishing them faster actually saves you money. So, but there's all sorts of ways to tackle that issue of raising pigs. Well, I've kind of come to the end of my presentation, and I think if there's any questions over what I've covered, we can handle that now and turn it back to Haley.
Sure. Let's start with a few questions that we have in the chat here. And thank you, Jean. All right. The first question is, when quarantining pigs from different sources, do you quarantine them permanently, or can you eventually move them together? For example, breeding sows with breeding sows.
Yeah, usually I like to see about a 3-week quarantine period. They don't need to be permanently. The reason for 3 weeks is because usually bacterial diseases will show up before that. Sometimes your viral diseases will show up about 14 to 21 days. So about 3 weeks would give you adequate time to determine if there's any issues. The other reason is if you vaccinate because you don't know what their history is and you decide you're going to vaccinate, let's say you vaccinate a sow protocol list of diseases, that gives adequate time for immunity so that by in the 21 days, they should have a pretty good immunity unless it requires a booster. But typically the first level of immunity is probably going to be good enough and you can booster them. But my standard is 21 days.
And let's see. Oh, and with that same question, with the quarantining of pigs, can you co-house different breeds?
Sure. That's not a problem. Again, though, if they come from different sources, you want to quarantine them, but excuse me, but no reason you can't put two different breeds together in the same pen. The challenge though is, if you're buying pigs from different sources and you quarantine them, then you mix them together, they might fight. They were going to establish a quote pecking order. And so regardless of breed doesn't make any difference. It's how they've been handled before. So I worked with a lot of producers that had Yorkshire, Duroc, Hampshire sows all in the same building. So even the same pen, no problem.
All right, we have another question. I'm getting a mixed feed from a local farmer. It is wheat, barley, and Australian peas. It's ground fine. It tested at 18% protein. I feed it from weaning to the end. Should I be changing feeds during the growth based on age and size of the pigs?
Not if it's working for you. I mean, if it's working, why change? If you're satisfied with the performance of them, how they're gaining, if the feed doesn't have any protein supplement in it, it sounds like 18% protein. It's got the peas are bringing in the protein. Again, they're a little low in lysine and methionine, but I guess, if you're satisfied, I'm not going to argue with that, making it more complicated. The only thing I would caution, though, is that I've seen over and over again over the years, and I looked at a lot of pigs that were necropsied in the OSU diagnostic lab that had ulcers, and the really finely ground feed causes gastric ulcers, and especially in feeder to market pigs. So if you don't see any slowdown and they're not having any issues, I'd say probably fine. I'm talking about really finely ground as opposed to a little bit coarse ground. And that's kind of like hard to describe. You'd have to look at some samples, but I've seen feed ground, for example, like flour, and uh, that leads to ulcers, and then the pigs really slow down on performance and average daily gain. But yeah, I mean, realistically, you could add some more protein, like some soybean meal or something to it, but to boost your amino acid content. But you know, if things are working, I don't know that I would make a change. If you're not satisfied with the, you know, the rate of growth and how fast they're getting to market, well, then um, you might want to, you know, change that up a little bit. Now, your older pigs don't need quite the protein, but then uh, it's I guess it's maybe harder to have several feeds available. If you're getting it already mixed up and ground and it's reasonable price, I don't know that I'd change it.
All right. Just one more question here, and then we have time to, if people prefer to ask them live or put more in the chat. Does your protein and energy ration information apply across all breeds of meat pigs? For example, we are looking at getting Mangalitsa pigs. Sorry, I'm not familiar with that breed, so if I mispronounce it, which have a higher fat content than average, as far as we understand.
I would say no, it probably doesn't apply across all the breeds. It applies to most of what I call the traditional breeds, which would be, well, let's call it traditional nowadays, would be your Hampshire, Berkshire, Durocs, Yorkshires, you know, Landrace, Chester Whites, etc. It still would apply to heritage pigs, the Tamworth, the Red Wattle, the large blacks. When you get into some of the other what I call exotics, Cooney, the pig that you're talking about, I really don't know whether they would apply or not. I don't have any I don't have a good handle on how those um, pigs would relate to the nutrient requirements that I showed.